What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back once again with another installment of the Beyond Omega Level character series, a series where we focus on the most powerful beings to exist in comic book form. And in this video, we are covering none other than Yellow Lantern Superman, which is basically what the name implies. Superman with a yellow lantern ring. So, as we always do, we have to explain what the concept of a yellow ring is, make sense of all this stuff, so you guys understand what we're talking about if you don't read Green Lantern. So in DC Comics, DC has what's called the emotional spectrum, which is an energy field comprised of all emotion in the DC universe and consists of rage, greed, willpower, hope, compassion, love, and fear. Now, when Thal Sinestro, a member of the Universal Peacekeeping Force known as the Green Lanterns, had used his ring to rule his planet with an iron fist, he was banished from the Corps and turned away from the willpower aspect of the emotional spectrum. After being sent to the planet Quard in the antimatter universe, Sinestro formed a Yellow Lantern ring which tapped into the fear aspect of the emotional spectrum and returned as one of the Green Lantern's most notable enemies. Following several defeats, Sinestro eventually formed his own Corps as an antagonist to the Green Lanterns, setting in motion the story known as the Sinestro Corps War. If you guys want to learn more about that, we cover videos every Sunday. There is a massive playlist down in the description with all kinds of Green Lantern stuff. Fun fact, Halloween is coming up. I meant to finish Blackest Night by the time Halloween came around. Before October ended, I ended up discovering that Blackest Night would run after Halloween, so we're doubling up. We're covering Green Lantern, Blackest Night all throughout the week in addition to our Marvel and DC stuff so that we can finish it in time for Halloween. It just makes good sense. The story is about zombies with the Black Lantern rings. Having said all of that, the Yellow Lantern ring chooses its wearers based on the ability to instill fear in others, and the power level of the Yellow Power Ring is determined by the amount of fear its user is able to channel through it, and it has no upper limit. Many of the abilities conferred by the Yellow Power Ring are similar to the powers of the other Lantern cores, like flight and energy and force field projection and hard light constructs. However, there are abilities specific to Yellow Lanterns, like the ability to probe the minds of their opponents, discover their greatest fears, and amplify those fears to cause their victims to experience immense psychological torture. As an extension of this ability, Yellow Lanterns can uncover and even erase the thoughts and memories of others and can exercise a degree of control over others as well. Now, there are certain weaknesses of the Yellow Power Ring. First and foremost, as is the case with all power rings, that they only have a finite amount of energy and require a recharge once that energy is depleted. Furthermore, Yellow Lantern rings are severely weakened and their ability to communicate with one another is greatly impeded in the presence of a Blue Lantern ring that draws its power from the emotion of hope. Now, as impressive as these powers are on their own, we now have to imagine them being possessed by Superman, who on his own is clearly an Omega level character. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over Superman's powers because I assume that unless you've intercepted this transmission from a far off galaxy far, far away, that you probably know who Superman is and know what his powers are. Now, the long and short of Superman's powers is that he has super strength with no defined upper limit. He's virtually indestructible. He has frost breath. He has heat vision. He can fly. You guys get where I'm going with all of this stuff. So what we're dealing with here is a crazy powerful character being further augmented by the addition of an artifact that's going to bestow him with even more powers. Now, as far as I can find, Superman has had possession of a Yellow Lantern ring twice in DC's comic history, once in the main DC continuity and once in a non-continuity story. Now, even though it happened later, I'm going to start with the time that Superman had a Yellow Lantern ring in DC continuity because there's really not much to cover. This actually happened quite recently in Superman Rebirth issues 29 and 30 in the current run of his story. Now, I actually have a video going over this story and all the ones that came before it in pretty good detail, I mind you, if you want to go back and check it out. But to summarize, Parallax, which is basically the living embodiment embodiment of fear in the DC universe, comes to Earth and starts possessing and kidnapping children. Now, when several children have gone missing, Superman goes on a mission to find them and finds out that Parallax was using the children as bait to lure Superman into a trap so that he could possess him, thinking that if he possessed Superman's body, he'd be virtually indestructible. Now, after initially refusing Parallax, Superman willingly allows himself to be possessed when Parallax starts draining the life force from the kids that he captured. And so as a result, Superman is transformed into a Yellow Lantern. Now, what happens after this is honestly a bit anticlimactic, as the Yellow Lantern Superman is attacked by the original Yellow Lantern, Thal Sinestro, who's trying to re-enslave Parallax as he had done in the past so that he could once again reach the height of his powers. And since Parallax is a living embodiment of fear, which is a pretty huge source for the Yellow Lanterns, Sinestro's kind of hoping to pull it off. Now, what I mean by this being anticlimactic is that we don't really get to see an epic battle between Sinestro and the Parallax-possessed Superman, because Sinestro enlists the help of the Weaponers of Qward to help him subdue Parallax, which is exactly what happens. Parallax and Superman are soon separated, and we're really left without much to go on as to what he would be capable of in this brief appearance. But as I said earlier, we actually have another story to draw on, albeit one that is not in continuity in the Injustice series of comics. If you're not familiar with the Injustice comics, they're based on the universe created in the video game Injustice Gods Among Us, where we actually see Joker kill Lois Lane and drive Superman insane, and then Superman goes on to eventually be corrupted by Sinestro and join the Sinestro Corps as the Yellow Lantern. Now, once again, if you really want an in-depth account of the events that happened in the Injustice comics, I've got a playlist based on that. Now, we have to preface this discussion by emphasizing that this is not the classic version of Superman, but a version from another reality that may or may not be as powerful in his base form than the mainline Superman. However, at the beginning of Injustice, it seems that the version of Superman from that story is pretty comparable in terms of power to his classic version. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to use his feats as a Yellow Lantern to give ourselves an idea of what classic Superman could do as well. So while he has a Yellow Lantern ring, Superman is able to basically shrug off a blast from Ganthet, one of the Guardians of the Universe, which are extremely powerful entities, so much so that they would surely be classified as being beyond Omega level themselves. To give you guys some perspective, in the story War of the Green Lanterns, which I'm not going to spoil because we're going to get to it on our videos on Sunday, Ganthet, probably the most powerful of the Guardians of the Universe, manages to hold off the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps by himself. It's a crazy display of power. It's one of the most insane things we've ever seen. But following this, Superman grabs both Ganthet and Mogo, the living sentient planet responsible for choosing new Green Lanterns when one of them die, and flies them both into the sun and destroys them. While this is pretty much all we have to go on, given how briefly Superman has ever been possessed by a Yellow Lantern ring, we can still just tell from this feat that he's going to be well above Omega level, which makes sense given that Superman on his own is Omega level. But the fact that a Yellow Lantern Superman can destroy an entire planet and a being who could probably wipe out the universe could likely do so to any number of planets that he chose to, which basically means that our definition of beyond Omega level as being a universal threat qualifies Superman to fit this category. So it's pretty insane the kind of power he possesses. What I'd be curious to see is, could Yellow Lantern Superman take on someone like the Spectre, who is the representation of God's vengeance in the DC universe? It's literally just, if God was pissed off and was coming for you, it would be the Spectre. Like, it's beast. The Spectre is an absolute monster. We should make a video about him, and we should do a video about Yuga Khan. Anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.
My friends! This is good. This
If you've been following the DC Rebirth storyline, then at the beginning of DC Rebirth, Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns, they had a massive epic battle that I'm going to link down below, but in it, Sinestro was seemingly killed. Well, in the latest Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern story arc, Fractured, which we may or may not have already done by the time you're watching this video, Sinestro was revealed to be around. Well, how is Sinestro going to get his powers back? That is going to be revealed today in Superman. Yes! Shouts a kid as he is standing in front of an old abandoned building, the LexCorp Gardens. We see in his phone that he's playing a game. One where you get to see the creatures on the screen in the real world. Playing his game, he crawls through a broken window calling out for any potential serial killers, and he wanders through the hallways until he finds a small glowing yellow creature. He asks if it's from the New 52 Zoo Crew reboot line. It of course says nothing as he reaches down to pick it up, realizing that it's not a creature in the game but a real life creature. You look afraid. My name is Z. I'll take care of you. And then we pan outside of the building and we hear him scream from the inside. 2 weeks pass and Superman is worried flying over Metropolis. The kids have gone missing on a regular basis, and it all began with Z. Superman is concerned every night as he goes home, hoping that John will not be the one missing next. He's been searching for these children and he's found nothing. He hasn't even found a clue. And every night he tries to give the parents hope as he travels to the missing children wall where they're waiting at. He lands telling them that he's there to check on them, and they ask if there's any news. He sadly tells them that they have nothing, which means they'll need to triple their efforts. Clark Kent of the Daily Planet should have contacted all of you to create profile pieces on each of you, and the parents tell him that none of that matters. What they know is that there will be another parent here tomorrow with another missing child. Elsewhere, a voice can be heard by a little girl. Wake up, you sleepyhead. Wake up or you'll be dead. She turns back to see Z standing at the edge of the bed. Who are you? If you don't leave, I'm going to scream. Oh, I hope you do. Then you can see what I do to the parents of the kids who scream. Go away! You're scaring me! Oh, I know I am. That's the point, silly. And back with Superman, he follows up on a clue that Jimmy got. He found a strange hue on the ground with his photos, and Superman uses his vision to see that it's actually a weird form of yellow radiation. Right away, he has an idea of what this means, except the Green Lanterns are off-world right now. If you're curious about what's going on with Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, check out our Green Lantern Training Day video. He begins to fly off following the odd yellow energy footprints until he finds Z. He hovers over him, seeing Z leading the little girl off. He's shocked to have found the first missing child. Your parents are very worried. Come with me so that I can help you. The yellow energy begins to flow from his eyes as he informs Superman, I don't need your help. He then blasts Superman into a nearby wall. I just watch you! Superman shatters the walls next to him. Zachary, I'm not sure what's possessing you, but you need to cool down. Superman then hits him with his freeze breath. Thinking that he's won, he walks forward, but the same creepy voice speaks to him from behind. Superman, scared yet? And the little girl blasts Superman. The girl turns to Z, passing the power back. He is stronger than the others. This won't be easy. They walk over to him as he's trying to get up from the blast. Stop. Let me help you. Love, hope, compassion. You have to let in the fear. Come play with us. Be one of us. Z blasts Superman again, and Superman wakes up a bit later, alone, with the police checking on him. As he soars into the sky, he begins to look for the color of fear, the yellow lantern's energy, and boom! He flies off to the ground to the house where it's at. Walking in the door, he begins to tear it off as the voice continues. Superman, you can hear them by now, can't you? Whimpering, crying for their mommies, praying for their fathers to rescue them. No one can save them, Superman. Not even you. I can feel your heart beating faster than a speeding bullet. The fear is growing in your stomach, more powerful than anything I've felt before. I can smell the terror bubbling up in your soul. So sweet, so delicious. He walks into the room to see all of the missing children suspended by the energy of the yellow lanterns and Z hovering in the middle. I'm so very hungry, Superman, and you finally look good enough to eat. Superman looks at him with his glowing yellow eyes and his sharp fangs. I was wrong before. You aren't Sinestro. You're worse. Sinestro was a tiny flame, and I am the shining yellow sun. Come out of that boy and face me, you coward. The being of fear, the entity of the Yellow Lantern, some would say the god of fear, exits the boy taking his true form, and he now stands before Superman. He is Parallax! He hits Superman with his tentacles, and Superman returns the blow with a blast of his heat vision before Parallax can grab him. You're afraid, Kryptonian, for your son, for these children. So much fear. Parallax leaps into Superman's mouth, diving into the mind of the Man of Steel, until Superman grabs him, throwing him out. I'm not afraid of you, Parallax. Fear can always be overcome. So Parallax retaliates by hurting the children in the blackest day and the brightest night. Beware your fears made into light. Those who try to stop what's right burn like my power, Parallax's might. Superman then offers himself to Parallax. Take me, leave these children. So Parallax dives into the body of Superman, consuming him, and then he stands tall. This body is now mine. Nothing can hurt Parallax anymore. And boom, he gets hit in the back as Sinestro has arrived. You have something that belongs to me, Superman. Superman leaps up, grabbing Sinestro by the throat. I now control Superman, Sinestro, as you once so foolishly tried to control me. Fear will always seep through even the tiniest cracks of the wall of courage. They launch into the air and they begin to plummet back to the ground as Parallax is barreling down on top of Sinestro. Its grip like a vice of steel, making it impossible for Sinestro to breathe. Like the fear an infant suffers, pulled beneath a powerful tide, unable to catch its breath no matter how fierce the struggle. You taught me this, what it's like to feel small. I no longer see your arrogance, only terror. They hit the ground with a crack like a boom. In the crater, Superman tells Sinestro, enjoy your final breaths. And with the last of his energy, whash, he hits Superman. Superman looks around and he realizes that he was just teleported to Quard. The weaponers of Quard are also looking at him. They all point their weapons at him, and as he breathes fire onto all of them, he shouts, I will not be your slave again. They hit him with everything, putting him to his knees, and Sinestro walks over. Welcome back to Quard, Parallax. As the Earthers say, there's no place like home. And with that, Sinestro puts him down. Deep inside the core of Quard, Sinestro has Superman bound up, looking for Parallax. He knows Parallax is deep inside of the Man of Steel. Superman tries to argue that Parallax is gone, but Sinestro knows the truth. He will exorcise Parallax out of him. He will take his power. He then blasts Superman with his greatest fears, the loss of everyone, not being able to be there for his son and family, turning into Doomsday again. It's all his fear. He deals with the cries of those that he could not save ringing in his head, and his fears are made reality. Help us, please, save us, Superman! And as he calls out, stop, please, Sinestro instead pulls out a whip and begins to crack it, trying to force Parallax out. I will fillet him from your soul then, Superman. That's when Lissa stops him. She grabs his arm and she tells Sinestro, he is afraid of you. So offer the one thing that he can't resist. Remove your ring and offer yourself, Sinestro. In the book, it is written that it has to be this way. Sinestro holds his arms out in surprise, and then he traps her in a yellow bubble of fear. I'm disappointed that Parallax took you over so easily, Lissa. He then struck from behind by one of the weaponers. Running will not save you, Parallax. I am a part of every living insect. You cannot stop me. You will not contain me again. He blasts the weaponer with his ring, and then Parallax leaps from body to body, trying to avoid Sinestro until he flees to the planet's surface, where Sinestro chases after him. Lissa asks what of Superman, and Sinestro tells her he's like Jordan. His power will fade and die, and he will die here frozen and alone. His death will be of no loss. Let's go. They leave Superman there, bound up to die eventually, but once he's alone, Superman says to himself, that's one point of view. Let's see what you're made of, Sinestro. Your will against mine. He begins to burn through the construct, and hours later, the battle between Sinestro and Parallax burns on, with a weakened Sinestro beginning to falter. Superman swoops in, grabbing him. You're still weakened from your fight with Hal. You can't win this, and you've given me a means to end this. And with that, he takes off Sinestro's ring. He then turns to Parallax. I'm still not afraid of you. Do your worst. And Parallax swallows Superman up. Inside of his belly, though, Superman digs out the yellow ring and he puts it on. There's so much terror in our hearts, but there's also joy, love, and hope. A single shred of hope can hold all of the fear in the universe at bay, and mine gives me the will to capture you. I know that you're scared, but you'll be safe in this ring, Parallax. I promise that I will not let Sinestro Sinestro capture you again. Parallax is absorbed into the ring, and Sinestro, weakened and injured, begins to question what just happened with Alyssa at his side. Sinestro then sees Superman with the ring, and he demands that he return it, and Superman's eyes glow red. "I'd like to see you take it." In response, Sinestro vanishes with a VIP teleporting away. Superman turns to the weaponers, telling them, "Teleport me home. You are free now, no longer required to do what Sinestro demands." He appears back at his home, and he peeks in on John to make sure that he's there safe and sound when Lois walks behind him, leaning on his shoulder. And there you have it. Superman has the willpower to fight against Sinestro, to fight against Parallax, to save the day once again. I really don't know why he's never received a Green Lantern ring, other than it would just make him way too overpowered. But what do you think of a Superman with a Green Lantern ring? And if you could pick any ring, which ring do you think that Superman deserves to have? Not the Injustice Yellow ring thing. Which one do you think he truly deserves? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel to keep up to date on DC Rebirth. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Comic Story, and if you want to talk about your favorite comic books. All right, over here, you're going to find the Superman playlist. Over here is going to be something by YouTube, right about there. And you can always subscribe with the little face in the corner. Thank you guys, and have a good night.
This kicks like a mule with his balls wrapped in duct tape. Wow! Tight, yeah! Blue, yellow, pink. Whatever, man, just keep bringing me that. I don't even know who you are. Damn, man, look at that, look! I knew it. Nobody moves crystal in the South Valley but me!
Recently, Superman was possessed by Parallax, becoming the entity of fear but also the Man of Steel. That story was resolved, but at the ending of the entire thing, Superman acquired Parallax by taking the ring away from Sinestro and putting Parallax into it. Now, we're gonna find out what happens when Hal Jordan goes to investigate that situation. In our last video, Hal and the Lanterns faced off against ancient robots brought forth by the DC Metal event when the new god Orion traveled to get help from the Green Lanterns. He explained that his father, High Father's father, Yuga Khan, had left behind the God Killer robots to preserve the old gods, eliminating any chance that his legacy would fade. It took the full support of John Stewart and the Corps to bring the fight to Yuga Khan at the Source Wall, ultimately stopping and saving the universe. Of the 2,600 sectors that make up the known universe, Space Sector 2814 is just like any other. But for Hal Jordan, Space Sector 2814 is simply home. Not long before the moment that he was staring at his home, Corps leader John Stewart received word from Cyborg at the Justice League that there was an issue that was going to need the Lantern's attention. Guy said that he had dibs, he's down to his last sixer and he needs to make a beer run. Kyle suggested that they all draw straws as they all want to go home. But Hal tells them that it seems rather suspect since he's the one creating them. John interrupts everyone and says that he's already made his decision, and it's not Kyle or Guy. Guy yells, "Come on, Johnny!" And John turns to Hal and tells him that he's up. As the other two grumble and walk away, John says that there's a reason that Hal was needed. The threat that they're looking at is Sinestro. Hal begins to ask Hal since he killed him in an earlier adventure, but John tells him, yeah, we know that he was supposedly KIA when you went full will and detonated Warworld. But that's what we all thought. If Sinestro is really back, then we need to know how, and more importantly, what is he up to? There's also another reason that I picked you. You have a history with our witness, Hal, Superman. Back in the current day, as Hal Jordan flies down to the planet, Superman tells him that he wishes that there were better circumstances on their meeting, but it's still good to see him. He goes on telling him that the reason that they were called is because the League ran into Sinestro. There were an increased series of missing children cases here in Metropolis, and what's more, it turned out that Parallax was behind the whole situation. Hal asks if he means Parallax as in the fear entity, and Superman tells him one and the same. I let Parallax possess me to protect the children, and that's when Sinestro showed up, wanting Parallax back. If you're curious about that story, we'll put it down below. That's Superman becoming a Yellow Lantern. Sinestro captured me and then took me to the antimatter universe. There, Parallax left my body and attacked Sinestro. Sinestro tried to take him over, but he was weak. He suffered heavy injuries the last time that he fought the Lanterns. But in the end, I was able to take Sinestro's ring with Parallax trapped inside of it. Hal says, you know, everything you just said sounds pretty crazy. Sinestro not being able to hold on to his own ring. Hal scans the ring and says, I would like to take your word on the matter, but Parallax isn't in the ring, Superman. Superman tells him, that's impossible, I saw it with my own eyes. Hal takes the ring and says that the Corps will investigate this further. For now, we're going to store the ring in this pocket universe until we can safely get it back to Mogo. Just then, Hal hears a voice calling out for help. Hal asks, help you with what? And Superman says, huh? The voice then says, Hal, tell me you're a hero. And Hal begins to feel his head throb. The voice screams out that they need help, and Hal blinks and everything begins to change. Another voice tells Hal that it looks like he discovered their secret. Superman isn't here anymore. All that remains is Parallax. Hal fires a construct missile into Superman asking, what did you do? And as Parallax hits the ground, he pulls himself back up, telling him, you should know better than that. We've taken more than a few road trips together. As the two fly straight at each other, Hal tells him, I tried to forget all about that, but if you want, you've got me now. With a crack-a-coom! The yellow and the green forces collide, and the ultimate struggle begins. Hal yells to get out of his friend, and he starts unloading all of his power into Parallax. He creates weighted chains to pull Parallax back to the ground, and he begins to punch him over and over again. As Hal stops, he catches his breath, stating that he won't take Superman. Superman is the best that there is. He's our strength and our heart. Parallax breaks free from his chains, focusing his fear of vision, telling him that that's why I needed Superman. Hal tries to counter the attack. As Parallax gets up, he says, enough of this, and he punches Hal back down to the street. Hal begins rubbing his head, asking what happened, and Superman floats down asking, are you back now? One moment we were talking about Parallax, and the next you called me Parallax, and I decked you. I must have hit you hard enough to snap you out of it, but you may have a concussion now. Sorry about that. Hal tells him that it sounded like he deserved it. There was a voice that took over his mind. Whatever got inside of his head, it wasn't Parallax, it was something else. The voice begins to call out again to Hal's mind, but this time, he sees where he needs to go. It's Hector Hammond, the most dangerous criminal telepath. Someone is trying to take him. Over on Stryker's Island, Hector yells as the little yellow gremlins begin sticking him with probes, stating, Master Engineer will be so ecstatic. Hector shouts, why are you doing this? Don't make me angry. One of the gremlins tells him, you have no power over us. We designed you. The Correlitian dominance is the key. We will make all of our enemies see any illusion that we wish them to see. And then Hector begins to smile. Another gremlin asks why he's smiling, and Hector tells him, because he's here. Suddenly there's a kraboom, and the walls explode with the green light of willpower. Hal Jordan and Superman fly down, and Hal tells the gremlins to let the egghead go. The gremlin says, that's impossible. The god's brain power clouds this place. Hal says that Hector got into his head and showed him what they were up to and where they can find them. Unfortunately for them, they tried this on the day when he's with his Kryptonian friend. So stop before you hurt yourselves. The gremlins shout that the god brain is still more powerful. The teleelectrodes will give us complete control. The only way to remove them would be to kill him. As they finish talking, Hal and Superman rush in and begin beating the gremlins down. One of the gremlins shout to activate the god brain. Activate it. Hal continues swinging when suddenly everything begins to change again, and suddenly he's back home with Carol and Jim and his whole family. He begins to smell the air and he asks, is that Mom's chicken soup? And Jim tells him, you know it, I finally mastered the recipe. Couldn't let the kids not know the real thing. Hal smiles, telling him, this is so perfect. The sights, the sounds, the smells. And Carol leans in, adding, the feelings. Hal and Carol kiss, and Hal says, it's perfect. Too perfect. You got everything down to the last detail, didn't you? The ring on Hal's finger begins to shine as the illusion fades, and he shouts to his ring, find the boss gremlin with the remote control and knock his teeth in. A piston shoots through the air, smacking right into the gremlin with the controller. Another gremlin starts making Superman see his perfect life. But once the master controller is broken, Superman grabs the gremlin by the neck. The gremlins shout, we surrender! We surrender! As Superman asks, do you know what it's like to have the thoughts of your parents toyed with? Hal begins to tell Superman to take it easy, and then all the heads of the gremlins begin to pop. Hal yells out, they belonged in science cells, not dead. As Superman asks, you really think that I killed them? Hector leans down, telling him, they made me mad. They wanted to control me. Everybody wants to control me, and I'm nobody's plaything. Superman's eyes begin to glow, and he says, Hal, I can't help myself. Hector goes on, telling him, how will I ever know love or happiness? I'm grotesque. I used to be handsome. I had great hair. Superman says the voice inside is telling him to aim for the brain, and Hal shouts for him to fight it. Superman's eyes begin to flare up and he screams, no! As Hal punches him across the jaw. The heat vision hits Hector in the side and he tells Hal Jordan, you're my hero. Superman falls to his knees, stating that he couldn't stop it. Later, once Superman repairs the walls to Stryker's Island, Hal brings Hector to Star Labs to try and keep him alive. The doctor tells him that Hector's medical condition is stable. The scans show that the electrodes are penetrating deep into his brain tissue. If there is a safe way to remove them, they haven't discovered it yet, but they will keep a team on constant watch. As the doctor leaves, Superman comes in stating that the repairs are finished, and that Hal asks him one question. You ever think that if you just squashed a head every now and then, there wouldn't be so many ticking time bombs loose in the world? The two wait in silence, and Superman tells him, no. And Hal tells him, me neither. Later that night, Hal finds the best flowers that he can and he heads over to Carol's house. He then waits outside trying to find the best way to approach her. Can we talk? Carol, I've missed you. Looking good, babe. He sighs, telling himself that he's a mess. Screw it, just do it. He walks up to the door and he gets ready to knock, and just before he does, his ring lights up and John tells him, we need you ASAP at sector 1103. Hal tells him, I'm not finished here yet, just a couple more hours, and John cuts him off, telling him negative. Evil Star is advancing on the Royal Capital and the Harvoth system, sending intercept coordinates right now. Move out! Hal stops and thinks for a moment, and then without knocking on the door, he takes back off into deep space. I personally found this to be a rather interesting two-issue storyline. While it was short, we did get to see the return of Hector Hammond. Now with the electrodes in his brain, is he going to be doing anything else? Is this a one-off? I don't know, but Hector Hammond is one of those old-school Green Lantern villains from before the space opera started. While I love the space opera, it's cool to see the old villains returning. What do you think down below? What other old rogues from Green Lantern's repertoire of villains would you love to see in the series? And what do you think of the Man of Steel versus Hal Jordan? Don't forget to check out more Green Lantern mythos right over here. Something about Superman on this side, and I'll see you next time right here at Comicstorian.
Talking at your ass, I'll pop out with this 38. Boomhauer. 8-foot main combat, goddamn propane main top out with that gun, man. Go pew 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 pew. Hit your fucking brain, man. Shotgun go ch ch ch.
So this story is gonna have one of the most amazing endings ever, so make sure you guys stick around for that. But I kind of forgot that DC was doing Deceased. Not gonna lie, I'm a little bit ashamed. I gotta get caught up, you know what I mean? So here's the thing, picking back up with this, right? We come off issues 1 and 2. Make sure you guys check the playlist down in the description so you can get caught up. We're literally 2 issues in, so we're just kind of picking up with issues 3 and 4 in this video, so you don't have a whole lot of catching up to do. But what this does is this initially focuses on a guy by the name of Adam Strange. Now, Adam Strange is a cool character, and he's a guy that you don't really see a whole lot of stories being done with, but he's got one of the most interesting aspects to any character in DC Comics. So check this out. The idea behind Adam Strange, and he's an old Julius Schwartz character from back in the 1950s. The idea behind Adam Strange is that on the planet Rann, right, you basically had the Emperor who did what's the equivalent of shining a flashlight from half a mile away in the middle of the desert, right? You'd see that light and just be like, what's that, right? And you would go and see what it was. So the idea behind the people of Rann is they literally sent a Zeta beam down to Earth in the hopes that people on Earth would be like, what in the world is this? They would trace it back to its source and they would come into contact with an extraterrestrial race, right? Expand the possibilities of humanity. What ended up happening is the Zeta beam was mutated through cosmic radiation, so when it hit Adam Strange, it basically gave him powers, and then it teleported him to the planet of Rann, where he basically ended up falling in love with this chick named Alana, right? He's actually got a child, right? So they basically have a kid together. But the idea behind the Zeta beam is that there is no real controlling it, right? Adam Strange will be teleported to Rann, and then he'll be there for a little while, then the Zeta beam will randomly teleport him back. There's no way of knowing when that's going to happen. So the idea behind his character is that he would literally just run around Earth trying to find where the new Zeta beam was going to arrive, and then ride the beam back to Rann, where he would really kind of operate as a protector of the planet while also trying to be with his love interest. It was cool, right? It was really, really cool. DC never really knew what to do with him, but the story behind him was great. And that's literally what happens here, right? Rann is one of the worlds that is under attack at the hands of basically the Undead Armada, right? If you guys remember everything we covered in the first 2 issues of War of the Undead Gods, that Darkseid has now re-emerged infected with the anti-life equation, right? Basically, this kind of anti-life version of a zombie virus. Not only that, Darkseid's also a Yellow Lantern now, right? So it's a immensely powerful Darkseid Darkseid more so than he normally is. And this literally allowed all these zombies that have basically been moving around the universe and infecting worlds to coalesce under the power of Darkseid and then start moving forward with an intention, right? To literally start conquering world after world after world. And so where Adam Strange is teleported away, his wife and his kid are basically left there to fend for themselves as best they can, along with whatever survivors are there. Now, it's not something that takes them by surprise. Again, Alana's well familiar with this, his kid's well familiar with this, right? They're aware it's just how these things go. And ironically enough, one of the downside of his character is that these things, the Zeta Beam would always activate at the most inconvenient time, right? So literally, this is the worst time for the beam to activate. But when it does, it teleports him back down to Earth and he arrives in Gotham City 2 months before a cure is found for the anti-life virus. And so what ends up happening is that as he's making his way through Gotham, he sees Wonder Woman while he's trying to understand what had happened here. Once he sees Wonder Woman, of course, she was infected. This is, of course, before she died, but she was infected. She immediately attacks Adam Strange and turns Adam Strange into one of the zombies. So what ends up happening is about 2 weeks later, Adam Strange is teleported back to Rand using a Zeta Beam, and when he arrives, he's infected and then attacks his family. So it's just the craziest thing, right? It's absolutely bonkers. Now, a few days after that, we basically transition over to the Rylex system with one of the coolest moments, right? One of the absolute best moments in this. It's not the crazy ending that I was telling you about, but it is one of the coolest moments, right? So basically here in this bar, and when you guys know, when we're talking about a bar out in space in DC Comics, you know who we're talking about. We're talking about the main man, Lobo himself. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, anybody out there who's not familiar with Lobo, this guy was designed back in the day to be like an over-the-top version of Wolverine from Marvel Comics that basically was on par with the power of Superman. Lobo's a hoss, right? This guy is amazing. But the thing about this is this guy kind of shows up out of nowhere and says, like, I'm looking for somebody noble who can basically, you know, help fend the universe against whatever threat is out there, right? This massive threat that's kind of running around. We're looking for somebody to help us. Is anybody down, right? Is anybody, you know, interested in this? Now, of course, Lobo's like, what does it pay? And this guy's like, I am looking for someone noble. You clearly do not fit that description. Now, the problem here is everybody hears this said, and it's just kind of like, bruh, that ain't what you want to say to a man like Lobo, right? But the crazy thing about this is before Lobo can help this guy finish with all his living, we end up having a Thanagarian warship that arrives onto the scene. And as this warship emerges, of course, all these Thanagarians who had basically been taken over by the anti-life virus, basically the race where like Hawkman and Hawkgirl come from, that they literally start like pouring into the entirety of the bar and even the planet as a whole and start attacking everybody. Now, the funny thing about this is one of these guys attacks Lobo and they scratch him. Now, under normal circumstances, a person would change. Lobo does not, because Lobo has an insane healing factor. He can heal from pretty much anything. In fact, Lobo's been cut into pieces and then just reconstituted himself. Again, his level of just strength and durability and healing factor is designed to be ridiculously over the top and comical. In this story, it pays off because this guy's like, you do not turn. And Lobo's like, oh, I could turn, right? I can keep turning and turning until your head comes off your shoulders, and like rips his head off. And he's like, nobody starts killing Lobo's bartenders without Lobo doing anything about it. So Lobo literally shows up here and annihilates the entirety of not only the Thanagarian warship, but most of the Thanagarians themselves. And that's where this guy's like, okay, so like, I guess you are the warrior I was looking for, right? A guy who's really capable. I mean, you got problems, right? But we could use you, right? I mean, you know, we can make it work. You know what I mean? We can make it work, right? So literally, what we do here is we switch over to Themyscira. Now again, Themyscira is throwing a funeral for Wonder Woman. Now it's one of those things that's really cool here because of course Diana was turned by the virus and then literally was instrumental in slaughtering I don't know how many people on Earth. But the thing about this is before all of that, she was Diana, right? Like the princess of Themyscira, Wonder Woman, and Amazon. So it's one of those things where just because she was turned by a virus and led to the wholesale slaughter of pretty much all of humanity, doesn't make her a bad guy, right? We all make mistakes. right? We all make mistakes. We all do things that we don't mean to do. And sometimes we say things we don't mean to say. But in all seriousness, right? Wonder Woman has always been an exceedingly honorable member of the superhero community. And because of that, her people on Themyscira, she's a sister to them. So it's less that Wonder Woman went on this rampage as just some kind of a villain, and more that she was a victim of a circumstance that she couldn't control. And so with this funeral being held for her, what you end up having is, of course, Artemis and Oliver Queen. Now, Artemis, she's a little more interesting. This is really, I would say, Tom Taylor, building on what's been happening with DC Comics over the last few years as far as Artemis goes, that the idea behind her character is that she was an Amazon that ultimately ended up making her way out into the larger superhero community, not really in an identical way to Wonder Woman. And of course, she fought alongside Red Hood in the Outlaws, which was an amazing comic in DC Rebirth. Oh my God, Red Hood? Oh, you guys remember that? Red Hood and the Outlaws from DC Rebirth? Dude, that story was amazing. DC has absolutely jumped the shark in recent years, but back when DC Rebirth was, dude, everything was the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth. I'm just saying, like, the stories were absolutely amazing. But of course, they basically fire off the arrows to, you know, as kind of a funeral pyre for Wonder Woman, and that's when Ares, the god of war, shows up. Now, under normal circumstances, when Ares shows up, it's because he's looking to start some stuff, right? Kind of stir that pot a little bit, get conflict brewing by feeding off the conflicts of people, inciting them into war with each other, different things like that. But the thing about this is that with his arrival, the Themyscirians absolutely, like, immediately turn on him, right? The Amazons, like, turn on this guy, and they're like, you're not welcome here. You don't need to be here. But of course, he tells them, like, I am not here to be your enemy. I'm not here to incite conflict or to incite war. And yes, myself and Wonder Woman were massive enemies over the years, but one, I'm here to pay my respects to an honorable warrior, and two, I basically am enlisting you guys in a gigantic conflict that's going on. I will show you what's happening. And so what he does is he brings all of them to the Hall of the Gods. And of course, he basically ends up giving the arrow of Apollo to Oliver Queen, right, to Green Arrow, which is cool, right, because he basically gets the bow of a god. Now, of course, he says the weight feels a little off. Can I tweak it? And the response of Ares is just like, can you tweak the golden bow of Apollo, a bow that hunted the great beasts of Carcoom, whatever, that slew the Leviathan lion? And Oliver's like, yeah, man, it's a little top heavy. And he's like, fine, you know, you can tweak it. So one of the things I love about Tom Taylor writing is he kind of has the ability to sort of inject humor with characters that you wouldn't normally expect to be humorous. Ares is never really a humorous guy, right? He's never really the guy where, like, he jokes and, you know, and makes little comments and stuff, but it's more the context of the situation that makes the whole thing funny. But the reality is that when they ask Ares, what is it that you want from us, right? Like, why did you bring us here? And so what Ares says is there's a war coming, right? Now, of course, Cassie Sandsmark, who was at one point Wonder Woman, literally says, like, we just had a war. Now you're here. Billions died before this. And this is where things get crazy, because what Ares says is that was no war. There was no struggle. There was only defeat. I am not the god of slaughter. And that's an important distinction to understand here, right? When you look at the entirety of Deceased, it is kind of easy to look at that and say, it's a war of the survivors versus the ones who were infected. But that's not how it played out. Remember back in, like, the first DC story, what happened? People got infected and the world ended. Like, over the course of the first, like, the original story arc, the original DC story arc, that happened, if I remember, over the course of, like, a few days, like maybe a week or two. But the world collapsed almost immediately. It was literally just people being infected and the superheroes fleeing for their lives because the infection had spread so incredibly fast, really thanks to the Flash who'd been infected, that there was nothing anybody could do, right? So the superheroes were just trying to save who they could, where they could, and got out as fast as they can, right? There was no war. It was just people fleeing for their lives. And so that's literally what he's saying now. And of course, what is kind of nuts is he says that it's not just a war that's coming, but it's a war that cannot be won. The final war, right? It will be glorious, but ultimately futile. I will stay to watch the end, but every race in the universe will die. And so when the question's asked, how can you be so certain of our failure? And he says, because all of this has happened before. And that's what's so cool about this, right? It's literally Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before, and all of it will happen again. He says, this is how the entire universe was infected. And so where Oliver asks the question, like Ares presents a book to him, right? And says, this is how things unfolded before. The response of Oliver Queen is the most logical one, where he's like, okay, so if what you're holding is a record book, right? A book that says like, this is how things transpired before, somebody had to have survived to tell the tale, which means if there was one survivor, there was more than one survivor. Otherwise, every race would have just died out for no other reason than the fact that they can't procreate anymore, right? So that means if there were survivors, then the question has to be asked, how did we survive this last time? And the response of Ares is, no one did. This is a record from a universe that was lost, right? A universe that was completely and totally lost. And so at that moment, you basically have Dinah, who's basically the Green Canary, right? She got a Green Lantern ring, that she's contacted by the Guardians of the Universe, who were just like, we're calling every single Green Lantern across the universe back to Oa. We're forming a staging ground, right? We're gonna use Oa as a battleground to figure out how we can defeat all these different undead folks who are out there. And that's when Ares says, it begins, right? And so literally this goes out to everyone out there, right? Kyle Rayner, John Stewart, like Kilowog, the whole 9 yards, Guy Gardner who's out there, every single Green Lantern. Not only that, the response of the Guardians on Oa is like, bring everybody who is an ally, everybody who's alive, any able-bodied man and woman who can fight, that has any measure of power, bring them to Oa, right? Every superpowered being in the universe is coming here if we can find some way to stage, keep this conflict from spreading beyond what it already is. But the funny thing here is kind of jumping back to Ares, the response of Oliver Queen is, well, things are different now. When the whole event first kicked off, we had no idea what was going on, but now we have a cure. We have the ability to cure everybody. Like Oliver's stance is like, we've basically already won. The only issue that we have now is how do we get a cure to everybody out there in order to turn them back to normal? And the response of Ares is, you're not fighting an equation, right? And that's when like Cassie chimes in and says, yeah, but Darkseid said, and Ares' response is, Darkseid is a new god. He's a child, right? A powerful pawn for something much larger. He had no idea what he was doing when he merged the anti-life equation with death. The gaze that's been turned towards us, that's the real threat. He says, this is no equation. This is older than numbers, older than the gods. The universe will die. And he says, Erebos is here, right? So Erebos is this being that's basically behind all of this, right? This is the force that was unleashed. Now, from here, we switch over to one of the coolest parts of the story, right? One of the coolest parts of this. That what ends up happening here is Alfred initially has these visions where, if you recall, in the first DC story, he was forced to kill Batman and Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. He was forced to kill these guys. So the only person that was really left here was basically Damian Wayne. Now, if I recall correctly, I don't remember off the top of my head, I want to say that Red Hood survived, but I can't remember. I know he was part of one of the tie-in stories, so if you guys recall down in the comment section, let me know. I could look it up, but like I'm in the middle of recording this right now, so I'm a single task person. I don't do very well when it comes to multitasking. But of course, all of these visions and everything kind of wake Alfred up out of his sleep, and he's basically there accompanied by Leslie Tompkins. Now, Leslie Tompkins had for the longest time been an ally of Batman. She was kind of comparable to Night Nurse from Marvel Comics. She is much older than that, or at least had been around longer than that. But the idea behind Leslie is she was the one that would tend to the wounds of Batman if he needed it, or she would help other members of the superhero community depending on the circumstance. She was a very significant character in the Batman mythos. Over the years, she lost that level of importance in DC Comics, and it's just kind of been relegated to a background character. So one of the cool things about Tom Taylor's run is that he has sort of bolstered her presence back up to being a significant member of the Bat family, even if it's only here to be a love interest and somebody to comfort Alfred. But the thing about this is that when Damian and Jonathan tell Alfred they have to leave, that they have to go join the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Guardians of the Universe, in order to deal with this massive threat of the undead armada, that initially Alfred begs Damian not to go, right? He's like, please don't leave. I already lost your father. I already lost what were basically my sons. I don't want to lose another son again. But the reality of Damian, and this really shows how much he's changed since like the initial outbreak happened, and how he's really become a hero. That stepping into this role, his response to Alfred is, this is much bigger than me, right? It's much bigger than you. This is literally the fate of the universe. And if I can die in order to save the universe, then it's a death worth having. I don't want to. I'm not going into this with the expectation that I die, but if I do, it will be for a great cause. And so the response of Alfred, and this is incredibly important here because I have a theory about this. I don't know if it's actually happened yet, but I have a theory about this. The response of Alfred is, if I can't get you to stay here, then I want to fight alongside all of you, right? I want to fight alongside you guys in defeating these undead gods. They've taken so much from me, and I don't want to sit on the sidelines and basically do nothing. And the response of Damien is, you really want to fight against these guys. And the response of Alfred is, yes, you have to find a way. A weapon, a power, a ring, whatever it is, I want to fight. I don't want to sit uselessly on the sidelines. Now, of course, this leads to Damien and Jonathan taking their leave and ultimately going, but it's really not without Damien saying, like, you say that there's so much of my father in me. I say there's a lot of my father in you, because he would say the same thing, right? If he were in your position, he would say, like, I don't want to sit on the sidelines. If for whatever reason Bruce Wayne was incapable of operating as Batman, say he was wheelchair bound or something like that, and didn't have a suit that could compensate by giving him the ability to move, that he would simply say, like, I want to do something. I want to be able to fight in some capacity. Or maybe Batman's like 90 years old, like he is in Batman Beyond, right? He's like 1,000,000 years old and just grizzled and just this crotchety old son of a gun in the Batcave. But still, you know, it's one of those things, because my theory here is that Alfred is going to become a Green Lantern. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think Alfred's going to be a Green Lantern. And the reason why I say that is, if you guys remember Tom Taylor's Injustice, Alfred took a pill that gave him the powers of Superman and beat the crap out of Superman and rescued Batman from almost being killed by Superman, and then took Batman out of the Batcave and just left Superman there. But Tom Taylor has a way of always, like, giving Alfred some kind of power, right? Giving Alfred some kind of an ability. At this point, we switch over to Almerac. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, man. We're basically shown Maxima, right? Now, here's the thing. Anybody who's been reading DC Comics for any measure of time probably had the same response that I did, where you're like, Maxima? She hasn't been relevant since, like, the days when Superman died, which is true. So the idea behind Maxima, and it's one of the most crazy things, the idea behind Maxima is that DC was tired of the idea of, like, Batman, I almost said Batman and Superman. They were tired of the idea of, like, of Superman and Lois Lane. And so the idea of Maxima is that her and Superman were genetically compatible. And so what that meant is that she could give Superman, like, the perfect kids, right? Superman didn't want to marry her and didn't want to have any kids with her, so he ultimately rejected her. But it was an attempt by DC Comics to create a new love interest for Superman. But the thing about this is that she hasn't been relevant since. She appeared in a couple different comics here and there, but, like, literally no one cared, right? It's just kind of like, oh, cool, Maxima, whatever, man, and just keep turning the page. So it is interesting to see her here, but much like her complete and total level of irrelevance in DC Comics, she's also irrelevant here, because her planet is attacked by Darkseid and the Undead Armada, and they're all conquered, and that's the story of her. So, of course, what we end up doing here is jumping back to Oa and, like, the coming together of all the Guardians of the universe, as well as all the superheroes who are here. Now everybody, like all the superpowered survivors or any able-bodied person who can fight, this is numbered potentially in the billions, right? Just this massive crowd being addressed by the Guardians. And what they say is that the Undead Armada has already taken 12 planets, right? These 12 planets have been seized, completely and totally razed, and their occupants or their races converted into members of the undead. And it's just spreading like a plague, right? Their numbers are growing at an exponential rate. One person bites 2, those 2 bite 4, those 4 bite 8, those 8 bite 16. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's just moving, and it's just moving so fast and spreading across the universe so quickly that the response of the Guardians is, there's only one thing we can do here, right? Like, another 7 planets with species clearly seen as assets by the anti-life equation have been infected. So now we're at 19. And he says, we are sanctioning lethal force. These infected worlds have to be wiped away. Now, this is an important distinction, because traditionally the Green Lanterns are a peacekeeping force. One of the rules that was laid down when it came to the Guardians of the Universe is the Green Lanterns could not take lives. In more recent years in DC Comics, that changed during Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern with the Sinestro Corps War. It was one of the massive moments of the conflict, because, like, the Sinestro Corps, the Yellow Lanterns, are just, like, wiping out Green Lanterns everywhere they find them, because Sinestro knows, like, the Green Lanterns can't harm anybody in that way. They can't into life. And so literally in the middle of this battle, the Guardians are like, we have no choice. And all these Green Lantern rings start lighting up with the statement, lethal force is now sanctioned. And like the tide turns like that. Like it's nuts. The Green Lanterns are like, it's on like Donkey Kong, and they start taking it to the Sinestro Corps. God, that story is so good. It was so phenomenal. But the thing about this is that in response to this, of course, Superman, who's now cured of the anti-life virus, and his son Jonathan do exactly what you would expect them to, which is say, we can't wipe out these worlds. We have a cure. We should be focusing on how to cure these people in terms of wiping these people out. Now, there are moral arguments on both sides and reasonable arguments on both sides. The stance of Superman and Jonathan is the preservation of life, helping people as opposed to ending people. But Brainiac and these guys who are survivors and have allied themselves against the anti-life virus, their response is the possible risk of going to the anti-life armada and trying to inject people with a cure. The risk is too great, because all that would have to happen is Jonathan Kent or Superman or some other being out there with incredible levels of power, or Brainiac with his incredible intellect. All will happen is they're turned and it's game over, right? Like the dominoes fall and it's the end of everything. The risk is too great. The only thing that we can really do in order to bring this thing to an end is to eradicate everybody there. So there's reasonable arguments on both sides, right? Sometimes the risk of the cure is worse than the disease, so you just wipe out the disease, which also includes wiping people out. So it's one of those weird situations where you can kind of create arguments on both sides. But of course, what ends up happening is Superman responds kind of uncharacteristically by lashing out and in fact attacking Ganthet, right? Just like punching this guy, right? Just like knocking this guy out. Because literally Ganthet is just like, if you stand against us and everybody else who's joined you, we will destroy you. Like we'll lock you up in a prison, that'll be the end of it, and we will go and take out these worlds. And so Superman attacking Ganthet is not something that you normally see. And so it's kind of weird because while all this is happening, we end up finding out Ares is basically watching all of this unfold. And what's so interesting about this is that it's actually Damian Wayne who picks up on what's happening. He's looking around at this whole situation and how quickly everybody went crazy and all started attacking each other. And his response is, something's wrong, right? Like I can feel it. My pulse is elevated, my judgment's clouded, my emotional response is heightened. We are not in control of this situation. And that's when he sees Ares and realizes Ares is kind of goading them all into fighting each other, because Ares is the god of war and is just kind of into that cool stuff. Now, of course, literally Damian says like, you're manipulating us, god of war. And the response of Ares is, I just gave you all a little nudge. Damian says, stop this. And then a voice comes out of nowhere and says, you should listen to that little man, Ares. This voice, it's coming from Mr. Mxyzptlk. He says, I won't let you hurt Superman. The fifth dimensional imp with the power of a god is here. Mr. Mxyzptlk, this guy can alter reality on a whim. So the real question you have to ask here is, what would happen in Deceased if Mr. Mxyzptlk is converted to an undead god? What would happen there? Because all he has to do is alter reality and it's the end of everything. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching and I will catch you all later. Peace.